The stories piqued my curiosity, and I began first collecting news clips from the local papers, which published little short news items on them, occasionally. And then I started looking for pictures, and I clipped a few of them out of newspapers and magazines until I ran into somebody that had an actual print. And I went to a lot of trouble negotiating with him to get a copy of that. But once I had one original print, it was easy enough to trade that to the next man and in return for his. And then I had 2 to trade, and then 4 to trade, and the collection grew rapidly when I had something somebody else wanted. And I just kept trading the same pictures over and over to others who had different pictures, and eventually everything that was out there came my direction, and I put it in the file. So at the present time, I think there's over 4,000 pictures in the files, and they're all different pictures, but it's purged, pretty well purged. I don't have any in there that I know are fakes or have strong reason to believe are fakes.
Colonel Stevens began his career in the Air Force as a young fighter pilot during World War II in the Pacific. An expert in the field of aircraft technology, after the war he was stationed with the Foreign Technology Division of the Air Technical Intelligence Center at Wright Field. During his 24-year career, Colonel Stevens played a role in the negotiations which led to the Japanese surrender and served as a consultant to the Bolivian Air Force in its structural formation. Retired from service in 1963, Wendelle Stevens has since earned an international reputation as one of the world's foremost UFO investigators, having published well over 20 books on the subject. His interest in the phenomenon was established in 1947 when he was transferred to Alaska and placed in charge of B-29 crews flying missions over the Arctic.
When I got to Alaska, I found that my additional duty, I was assigned there as an assistant base operations officer, completely out of my specialty. My specialty was technical engineering. As an assistant base operations officer, and my additional duty was supervising a team of civilian technicians from Wright Field, where I had just come out of, that were installing special equipment aboard the B-29s that were flying their target profiles are over all the B-29 crews had their targets in Russia, and they carried them home with them. They had them with them all the time so they could get on an airplane in 5 minutes and have the targets with them. They were required to fly a profile mission on their targets over the Arctic and Arctic airspace and their Arctic conditions at least once, and every crew was rotated through Alaska to do this. My team was installing special equipment to look for anomalous aerial phenomena, is what the Russians were calling it. We were calling them flying saucers. We were looking for surges in the electrical system. We installed surge detectors in every system on a B-29. There's 5 or 6 different electrical systems. We installed magnetic detectors in the lines. We installed cameras in positions that didn't have, all the gun positions on the B-29 already had 60-millimeter cameras in them. But we installed other cameras that looked forward and looked aft. We had handheld cameras. We had even 35-millimeter movie cameras and a big 70-millimeter movie camera that could be used. And they also had a Fairchild 8x10 camera that was a big thing like this. It took a picture on an 8-inch by 10-inch negative. So all of that stuff was carried aboard the airplane, and after the operation people briefed the crews, then after the weather people briefed the crews, then the Coast and Geodetic Survey people briefed the crews, then I had to brief the crews on the equipment that my team had put aboard and how to use it and what it was for. And if they got anything when they came back, they were debriefed in the same order, and if they had experienced anything, they'd be turned over to me last, and they'd tell me what they experienced one by one. And while they were doing that, my crews would be downloading the cartridges, cassettes, and film cans, and all of those things we had. And if they had had an experience of any kind that was unique and important, the data would all be boxed in a metal box looked like a little footlocker, about that long and about that wide and about that high. And that was padlocked on a lieutenant's wrist and flown out to Washington every night on a courier. And he had to go to a certain office that had a key to take it off to unlock him and turn him loose. And they kept the box and sent it back on the next courier flight We had several of those, and this was how the data was transmitted to Washington. We never had no way to read it. We couldn't develop that. We could, but they weren't allowed to develop the film, to read the tapes, to look at the movie camera film, nothing.
But you were hearing stories.
Well, we'd hear the stories that resulted from the action that was on the film, but we never got to see any of it. So there were some real interesting stories about seeing objects sitting on the water, submerge and disappear as the B-29 came along. Other times they'd take off and fly away. Some once was seen to come to the surface and emerge and fly away. They saw them take off from the ice surface of the ice pack up there, the snowfield. And these are big objects, 100 feet in diameter, that have no ground support equipment. You know, to get a B-29 airborne in the Arctic in the wintertime, it takes a field of equipment around the B-29 as big as the B-29. Well, here were bigger craft sitting on the snow up there with no ground support equipment that take off and fly away at high speed. And that puzzled our senior leaders a good deal, because they wanted to believe that it was a Russian innovation that had come out of the war, that they didn't want to accept the idea that it might be extraterrestrial. In fact, I was almost alone in that idea. Most of the time, I'd tell my boss that I thought they were extraterrestrial beings, and he'd laugh and he'd say, they can't come here from there and go back. Why would they come? Because cosmic distances are too vast. You know, if it's going to take you 50 years to get someplace and 50 years to get home, who's going? Among the first photographs taken on the old tin-type cameras was one at Drobak, Norway, showing a photographer with the big bellows over his head and a big camera on a tripod was taking a scene of the harbor, an afternoon scene of the harbor, early evening, and he saw an object moving from right to left across the field of view, snapped a picture of it, and got perhaps the first photograph of a UFO at close range in Earth's atmosphere in the sky here. And that picture was taken on the 27th of July of 1907 at Drobak, Norway. The next picture of importance, and probably the second or third picture of UFOs taken, was photographed by Mr. Alfredo Fandricas, a weekly news magazine reporter for a paper in Fatima, in Portugal. And you know, the apparitions began in September, in August, 13th of August, 13th of September, and the 13th of October. In the first apparition, the children saw the sun swooping overhead, and an apparition appeared, and to 3 shepherd children, they reported that to their priest. The priest went with them the next time. The apparition happened, only the 4 people saw it. They got the word that it was going to happen a third time on the 13th of October. Now, all this is predicted in advance. And by the time of the third anticipated apparition on the 13th of October, there were 12,000 people gathered in the fields there. When the object appeared, it was brilliant, came through saw a spot, it emerged through the underside of the clouds. It was rotating on a vertical axis, began to swoop over the heads of the crowd like this, making low passes back and forth over the crowd. Alfredo Fandricas got 2 pictures with his camera of the object in the sky. We have one of them here. It shows up as a brilliant ball of light below the clouds. It's a tin type, so it's not the sharpest picture of all. Then the next pictures of consequence were the pictures taken during the Japanese invasion of China and their Manchurian operation. They used aircraft, and objects appeared over the flight line of the Japanese bombers preparing for missions. They appeared following the bomber formations in flight. They appeared in the sky above formations. They even passed through formations, much like the Foo Fighters of modern history, modern war history, except they were something else then. And it was during that time, during the Manchurian occupation, that a Chinese or a Japanese general in the occupation forces was walking down the street in Tianjin, China, and he his attention was drawn to an object in the sky because the street photographer, one of those with the old bellows camera, had it set up, and people started pointing and shouting and pointing to the object in the sky. Rickshaws stopped, crowds stopped, people pointed. The tin-type cameraman aimed his camera and took one picture of the object coming down the street. The Japanese general went over and bought it and took it back to Japan. And that's the photograph made in 1942 at Tianjin, China, in the middle, full day, daylight. The next one of any serious importance was one that was made over Los Angeles on the 24th, the night of the 24th to 25th of February, 1942. And this was after our war with Japan had started, and we had our cities in blackout at the time. Los Angeles was blacked out every night, San Francisco, San Diego, the whole west coast of the United States. And at early in the morning, like 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, disc-shaped objects appeared over the city. And the anti-aircraft batteries turned on the searchlights. The objects passed back and forth through the searchlights, some dozen objects in the sky. They started, anti-aircraft batteries started firing on them, and they fired, they fired 1,430 rounds, anti-aircraft rounds of ammunition. Didn't hit a thing that night. They killed a few people. The falling metal from the anti-aircraft shells killed people, dogs, set houses afire, did a lot of damage, but didn't hurt any, didn't bring down any alien craft. The next one of serious importance, again, was before, well, it was after Kenneth Arnold described flying saucers. Yeah, that was in 1949. But the next photo event of interest happened on the 17th of March in 1950 at Farmington, New Mexico, when on that day, Mr. Walter Rogel, managing editor of the Farmington Times, published news on the front page of his paper, "Huge saucer armada jolts Farmington." Now what happened on that day, the town's population of about 5,000 people then, looked up and saw spaceships, circular, disc-shaped, metallic disc-shaped craft with domes on the top, passing over their city. They were changing position within the formation like a flock of bees or birds. They did not maintain a regular established formation. It was just a large gaggle of objects that flew over. Hundreds of them flew over for almost 2 hours, and the same thing happened the following day. One picture escaped collection by the military people that went there and canvassed the houses. They took all the pictures, took cameras, but somebody had in town, left town after taking the photographs and took one to Durango, Colorado, where he turned it into the Durango paper, and Durango published this one photograph. Shows about 7 or 8 of the objects in the sky, 5 of them in a loose formation at lower level and 4 or 5 at higher levels beyond it. A bird watcher walking in the woods on the 23rd of April, 1950, was crashing through the underbrush, and he emerged into a clear area not far from Redbud, Illinois, facing the southwest. He came into a clearing from the south side, and as he stepped into the open area, he saw a large object hovering just over the scrub bushes there. Now, this was about 30 or 40 feet in diameter, and it was less than 100 feet high. It was below the tops of the trees. And as he stepped into the clearing there, it started to move. Slowly at first, and then faster and faster. He had time to open his reflex camera, where you look in the top, and they're hard to sight in because the scene moves the opposite direction once you move the camera. And he got it open and got one picture, and by the time he could roll the film and get set up again, it had moved so far away, he was afraid he wouldn't get it. He snapped the picture. He got a little dark spot in the sky, but it was not very definitive. It was just a dark smudge leaving. The first picture was a good, sharp, clear picture. And he turned it over to the local newspaper, and it was published on the paper. And a few days later, he was contacted by a newsboy who was throwing papers that time of day down the road in a rural area. And the newsboy said that he saw the object coming from the direction of the woods, heading down the highway at about 4 times, 5 times the speed of an airplane. And he looked up at it and saw it, and he, down the road a little ways, he came on a man and his wife working on the roof repairing it, and he said, "Did you see the thing that just went over?" And they said yes, they had watched it also. So there were other observers that corroborated Dean Morgan's story, and they came out in news reports the following day. So that was an interesting sighting because it represented a type seen rather close up and photographed within 100, 150 feet, 200 feet of the camera. The next one that got any real attention occurred on the 11th of May of 1952 at McMinnville, Oregon, at about 7:30 in the early evening of 11 May 1952. Farmer Paul Trent was in the kitchen of his home when he heard his wife, who called to him from the backyard to come out and see the strange object that was approaching. And he immediately ran for his folding camera and dashed outside to meet her. There against the low overcast sky, he saw a circular dome disc with a tower on top of the dome, a raised cupola. It was moving fairly slow. He had plenty of time to frame it. He snapped the first picture, and then he had to move to his right to snap the second picture. There was no flame or efflux of any kind visible, no sound. It was completely silent. His wife didn't hear any sounds either. The pictures he took on the 11th of May, and he didn't report them until the 12th of June, when he had his pictures developed and back, and he showed them to a friend, Frank Wartman, who suggested they take him to the newspaper, and they took him to the Richmond, California Independent, where they looked at them, tested them, and published them for the first time. So now that it's 2 months after the pictures were taken before the information got out. But they have become a classic in the lore of ufology, I guess if you want to call it now. And they've been verified by a number of researchers.